Let me just do that. So we are recording. Okay. So we're going to have our guest speaker join us in a few minutes, and I'll be looking forward to introducing him. And I mentioned, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in our first class, I mentioned that I can teach you project management or I can teach you how to manage a project. And, kind of two different things, right? There's a lot of theory attached to project management. And in our connected world, and especially using Zoom, the system, we're really privileged that we can actually be able to interact with a wide range of people who are experts in various aspects of project management. Individually, we can't be good at everything. And so tonight we're going to be hearing from someone who's actually dedicated his life to communications and has loads and loads of experience all over the world. So that's going to be very interesting and a very good speaker as well. I always enjoy listening to him. So I'm going to be dividing up tonight's class around the theme of communications first off. So we'll kick off with that. And then also just continuing that deep dive into the results-based management, or RBM, that we were discussing last week. And you'll probably recall that we went through that whole causal pathway for developing a logic framework, figuring out how we identify the underlying root causes of a development challenge, and then the solutions that we can build into our results chain. And then we went into looking at how to put together our results statement itself, building up from an activity to an output to an outcome, and then ultimately our project objective, or what they call the ultimate outcome. So after we've had an opportunity to hear from our speaker, I'll just continue last week's discussion by building on that logic model framework, the one that you're working on. And then we'll be adding smart indicators for conducting the measurement framework piece of the logic model. So that's the next step in that process. But first, I just want to reflect back to our earlier classes where we've been talking about the importance of soft skills in project management and the importance of our 9 management core and support processes. So there's a single common denominator throughout most of project management, I would say. No matter what phase you're at or what activity or sector you're doing. And that common factor is communications. I feel that very strongly. And it's more than a vital aspect of a well-managed project. And you'll have some key groups of people with whom you'll have to communicate on a regular basis. And I also refer to this sometimes as what we call managing up and managing down. So if you're, just as an example, if you're managing up as a project manager, you're communicating to your supervisor, to your headquarter team, to the executives of your organization or its board, or you might be talking to government, to local authorities, community leaders, or your donor even. And these are the people that can stop the project in its tracks, right? Or they have a significant amount of control on its direction and its course. So these are, the important people above you. And there's a certain language for how you speak to those people. And if you're managing down, which is equally important, you're communicating with your community stakeholders, to your project team, to your partners, to the general public, or to other vendors or those with some sort of stake in the project. But they are not going to normally be able to exert that same kind of control over your project. They can't stop it in its tracks, in other words, because they're usually dependent on your oversight, your management and control. But they'll certainly be able to influence how you operate, or even if you operate. It's just a very different group of stakeholders. And a project manager is required to be able to manage up and down equally effectively. Both are very important. What I've found in my career is you'll see many people who have developed a particular skill in doing one or the other, and they're really good at it, but they're not good at both. But that can also be very difficult. So you can't speak to your project management team, let's say, the same way you're going to speak to your organization's board. And the type of information you package for each will be quite different. And the manner in which you communicate or deliver that package of information, that's going to be different as well. It can be quite formal, or it might be a very informal channel of communications. It can be either way. But I would say in all cases, the project manager needs to be clear and effective in how they communicate. So it can be to argue a point, it can be to influence a direction in the project, it could be to obtain a buy-in from stakeholders, or maybe it's even just to motivate groups to undertake certain activities. And when you're working in cross-cultural environments where we have diverse work groups, differing cultures and languages, being clear and effective in our communications is really going to be paramount. So it's incredibly easy to miscommunicate and to knock the project off its rails, so that the project manager has to be able to maintain the relationships at all levels in order to keep things on an even keel. I'm just going to check our participants here. So what I'd like to do is prioritize this subject this evening, because in my opinion, communications is not just about the soft skills you have to have as a project manager. Remember the illustration that I showed you in our first class, the one up on the slide. So an important characteristic of our project manager is being a strong communicator. So it's a big part of the characteristics that you would have to have. And communications is really the lifeblood of a successful project at all levels. So how our stories, our anecdotes, our photographs, our videos, our reports, data are received by different groups is going to shape how successful we are in our project implementation. So if we can't communicate what we've been doing or what we plan to do, then it really won't matter how successfully you've implemented your project. So you've lost that, very critical audience. So the challenge for us all is how we share that information, how we share an idea, a concept amongst the various stakeholders of a project. Well, me personally, I have to say, and I'm sure our speaker today is going to, he'd back this up. I've had pretty bad luck communicating to the media. And that's the main reason that I always lean on qualified people like we have in our guest speaker this evening. And I'll share some of those stories with you later, but they've been pretty tragic, some of my experiences. So you just have to watch the news, even on the election process we were just talking about in the US, to see how information and statements can be misconstrued or can paint a completely negative picture. And it is easier to do than you think. So we need to always be aware of how the receiver of the message will interpret what the sender is intending, or what you would be intending. So as I'm sure we're going to hear tonight, communications is not an absolute by any means. And that's why I put it in the soft skills category. But in fact, I would say from my own experience, there's a lot of science behind how one communicates effectively for and on a project or a program. But there is also a lot of interpretation. There's a lot of emotion that's attached to communications as well. So they say that a picture can paint 1,000 words. You've heard this phrase. And I wanted to share this picture with you, which was, to me, a reminder over many, many years as to why I personally was in this business of helping people in faraway lands. And I've got lots of people I look back on that influenced me and how I worked. But this little boy was really particularly profound for me, and his name was Benjamin. And I met Benjamin in the northern part of Burkina Faso, West Africa. And it's a pretty dangerous part of the region and a breeding ground for militant groups and illegal mining operations, a lot of thuggery, that sort of thing. And this was an illegal gold mining operation that ran under the auspice of a legitimate gold company. And I won't name the company, but let's just say they are a legitimate company. But they use all these illegal subsidiaries to do some illegal mining as well. And I wanted to see how these places operated. And we had to take a jeep load of soldiers with us to form a circle around us while we were up there for our protection. And Benjamin was just pulled out of a hole in the ground, this one right here in the middle, by a rope. that was basically his workplace all day. And he had a light strapped to his head, and he was given a little plastic container, the one that you see on the ground there on that rope. And basically, he was sent down 50 feet in order to scrape gold off the sides of that hole, that dark hole, to bring up for his supervisor. And in the slide here, you can see the little scraps of gold he might bring out each day for his overseers. So Benjamin, you can see it in his face. He wouldn't talk. He had trouble making eye contact. You know, clearly he had some kind of PTSD for sure, and I don't blame him. And it was pretty clear he was traumatized, and he was being heavily exploited by the mining company because he was small enough to be dropped into the holes, and he could work 16-hour days. So through a sponsorship agency that was based in South Korea, we managed to have Benjamin sponsored, and he became a sort of poster child for a large Korean fundraiser that ended up raising, I think, close to $500,000 for Burkina Faso. And the image of Benjamin spoke for itself, and people in South Korea rushed to help children like Benjamin. And there were mixed reactions from audiences around the world as to whether this photo was classified exploitative or not. Did the means justify the end, in other words? But about 2 years later, Benjamin's photo came across my desk, and by then he'd been sent to live with his uncle at his house, and his family was receiving support from the project that was established with the funds that came from South Korea. And it was a little township in the north called Zorgo. And well, you know, when I got Benjamin's photo, he went from this traumatized little boy in a couple of years to someone who attended school regularly, who played football, and had that joie de vivre. You know, his joy of life came back into his face. What a huge difference. And it reminded me 2 years later why I was doing what I was doing. You know, when you hit those low points and you feel sometimes self-doubt, and you see something like that, it really picks you up and reaffirms why you're in this business, why you go into it. So it could never have happened without a proper channel of communications, an effective media campaign, fundraising campaign, along with all the management processes we had to put in place in the projects for the right, you know, to be in the right place to help children like Benjamin. So having said that, it's my pleasure to, you know, introduce our guest speaker for the evening. And he's someone that I first met out in Nairobi, Kenya, in, I think it was 1997. And in fact, he used to camp out on, well, I'm probably sharing stories out of school, but he used to camp out on one of my spare chairs in my office. And I kept asking people, who is this guy? You know, he would sweep into our office in Nairobi with safari clothes on. He was covered in dust. He had a light scarf and 3 cameras slung around his neck, you know, and he used to breeze in and breeze out. So he was kind of this, he was a real symbol in the office. So how was I to know that we would end up being eventually good friends and working together years and years later in another agency? Well, Philip Mahar has worked as a communications media specialist for a variety of large and small aid organizations. And while working alongside organizations like World Vision and the World Food Program, he's traveled to more than 80 countries, and he's seen virtually every kind of crisis. He's worked in conflict zones like Afghanistan, East Timor, Somalia, Sudan, Rwanda. He has documented humanitarian suffering in refugee camps, people suffering because of tsunamis, earthquakes, cyclones, civil strife. And he's also managed communications for delegations to North Korea and a variety of UN-related conferences, such as the signing of the Treaty on Anti-Personnel Mines and the signing of the Rights of the Child in New York. And if you go around some of the NGOs, you'll see his photos and his stories appear on everything from their walls as you walk in their office, to their annual reports, to news articles and building cornerstones. And in his role as a media relations specialist, he's appeared on a variety of media, including things like the CNN, CBC, CTV, BBC, ITN, and other outlets. And I've got to add there that he's also got me on some of these, just sheerly by his many contacts with the media outlets. And he lives in Guelph, and he writes a monthly column for guelphtoday.com. It's on the slide there. If you're interested, you can look that up. And he goes by the pseudonym Mercy Traveler. Those are his articles. And I'm sure he would add you to his list too if you wanted to receive his monthly articles. And these days he's leading small groups into Southern Africa when the pandemic wasn't there, of course, and continuing his freelance career. So you can follow him on his Twitter or in his articles that he publishes as well. And he has degrees from the University of Ottawa and also from Providence College. So without saying further, join me in welcoming Philip to our class. And without further formality, I'd like to hand over the virtual floor to him. So welcome, Philip, for joining our class.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Now, let me see if I can figure it out. I'm not good at this. Start video. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. And I've got to give you some sharing.
Okay, right.
I got to stop sharing. So give me 1 second.
There we go. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Cool. All right. And let's see. And then I want to share. How do I share my? Okay. Then I want to share my PowerPoint. Share screen.
Yeah. I got to give you.
Okay.
There you go. Make you a co-host. So you're a co-host now. So
all
you
right.
can take charge of that. Yeah.
I'm a co-something. Share screen. Okay.
Yeah.
And screen 1. Let's see. Share. And
there it is. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. You can see. Y'all can see that.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Perfect.
Great to be with you all. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, we've seen a few miles. Yeah, I used to pass through Nairobi quite a bit when Phil was working in South Sudan, and sometimes I don't know that we actually ever were in South Sudan together, but I was often in South Sudan, but it seems like maybe we were in different locations. But anyway,
crossing.
Yeah, it's kind of. So I want to, I'm going to share a lot of stories because I think at some level communications is about creativity, and we're going to sort of, I don't want to say go all over the place because it sounds like it's I haven't thought it through, but I have actually, and everything that I share is relevant. I mean, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is international development, but it's relevant also in your church. It's relevant in your in any business enterprise that you're involved in. The principles of communication are really pretty standard, I would say, and they're fairly universal. A lot of it is, in my view, a lot of it is kind of common sense, at least at this level. And then obviously it can get quite complicated depending on how deep you want to dive. But we're going to kind of just talk a bit about a number of relatively simple principles, but I think they're important ones that I think we all need to be reminded of. And if at any time you want to ask a question or whatever, feel free just to dive in or unmute, or I don't know, wave your hand or whatever you do. Yeah, that'll do. So let me just start off. And first, we're not going to spend a lot of time on sort of theory, but we do have to start with theory. And this is probably something that you have all seen. Have you guys all seen sort of something like this, the communication process, sender, receiver, message? Is that pretty standard? And I will send you some of this material so that you've got it. So I just created this one myself with Stewie and Tweety for no particular reason, except that they're two very different people in many ways, and they have different beliefs, and that's kind of one of the points of what I want to get across here. So this is very old. It's hundreds of years old, actually. This basic communication process. And there's different versions and different names, but it's all pretty much the same. And you have the sender on one side, which is Stewie, and you have a message that Stewie wants to convey. He wants to convey a message to Tweety, and Tweety Bird, of course, is the receiver. And then Tweety Bird then wants to send information back through feedback to let Stewie know whether he's actually been understood. Uh, in between them is the medium, basically the channel. How is he going to communicate with the Tweety Bird? Is it email? Is it an announcement? What is it exactly? And both of them have filters. And so those filters could be, values, beliefs, gender, ethnic origin, all of that stuff. And basically the beliefs can create noise. They create a dissonance so that when you're listening, you're not really hearing what the sender is trying to communicate. And my view is that it's always the sender's responsibility to ensure that their communication is communicating properly. If somebody says, I didn't understand, in most cases, my view, partly just as a communicator, it's like, okay, that's my problem. I need to figure out why you're not understanding. Even if I think, frankly, maybe it's your fault, I'm like, how am I going to say what I'm going to say so that you can understand? And it seems to me, if you're doing project planning, you're going to want to communicate a lot of things to a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different audiences, and each one is going to be very different depending upon whether it's somebody that's, if I can say below you, I don't like the term, but you understand what I'm saying. Maybe it's a board member, maybe it's your boss, whomever it is. So with that sort of basic theory, let's move on to a topic that is quite on our minds. So we all know, I think you probably know when Camilla said, I am speaking. Basically, Pence started to interrupt her, and then she said, I'm speaking. And to me, it's an example of filters. It's an example that both of them have a very different worldview. And he, of course, is a white guy. He's a guy. He's white. She is a person of color, a woman. And really what she was saying, and I'm sure it was planned, I'm sure she couldn't wait for him to interrupt her. And basically she said, I'm speaking. In other words, you know what? You've been oppressing people of color or women or whomever for many years, and now I'm speaking. Now it's our turn. I mean, it was very clever, I thought. And whether you agree or disagree, I just thought it was a smart move. And essentially, the whole thing, I think was all kind of staged a bit, right? She had it all planned. But the point being that you need to be especially careful with your biases when trying to convey a message. And, especially to subordinates, people that are working, again, below you. I'm going to use that term, but as I say, I don't like it, but it's the simplest way of saying it. So it's just an example, I think, a current example of the biases and the filters that we have when we're communicating. And I'm breaking down the different parts of that communication process, and I'm going to talk about filters for starters, and then we'll move on to the different sections. So I'm talking about filters here. When I worked in Cambodia, we took over an Olympic skater, this lady on the left. And we wanted her, we sat down, and she was going to do some speaking for us. We thought, okay, she needs to experience the field. What is an issue that she can relate to? What is an issue that will resonate with her? But also when she speaks, she can have some authority, and she can understand understand the issues. Well, of course, Cambodia is a country where there's a lot of child prostitution. There in the past has been a sex tourism that goes on there. And there's some really great programs, great organizations that are fighting that now. And so we had her sit down and talk to different families about some of the issues around sexuality, sex abuse, how children either get sold or they're sent from Vietnam to Cambodia, etc. And my point really here is just to say that, when you're dealing with any kind of culture, you obviously want to think about the filters. And the filter for us, the filter we wanted to avoid was that you'd have somebody who didn't really understand what the issues were. And as a woman, she can have some understanding of that. And so we actually run a home for girls that have been forced into the sex trade. And so we had her sit and talk to some of the girls. I took this picture as an illustration. Then I left the room. There was just her and another female translator. And so they could have, a conversation, a private conversation about some of the things that had gone on. And we had two girls together because they can support each other. We asked them to make sure that they were comfortable talking to somebody to help them to understand a bit of, what their life had been. And it really ended up very fantastic. I mean, this Olympic skater ended up doing a lot of public speaking for us, and it really brought them together again. Reducing the filters. They were girls. It's cross-cultural, to be sure. Wouldn't if you're doing other kinds of activities, you'd want to bring in somebody who's a local Cambodian, who could talk to them, understand the culture and the language. But at a very basic level, at least, we felt that we wanted to do no harm, and this process was a process that we felt was respecting, especially the girls who were vulnerable.
Philip, can I
Yep.
just ask, the picture before that one with the two little girls on the floor?
Yep.
I'm just wondering, besides being a really good picture, is that intentional when you take it from the back as opposed to from their perspective? Is that protecting them? And
Absolutely, yeah. We would never show the face of the girls, and it's a little photo you'll see later on, and the same thing. They're all sort of back or side photos. So yeah, we there's very strong policies in the center for starters, but also as a communicator, I have sort of you have policies of things that you are not going to do, and that's one of them. For the same reason, for example, that if I was entering a hut, say in Africa, I try as much as possible as a male, and I'm taking pictures of children, especially girls, but children. I will try to have somebody present with me, and frankly, it's to protect me as much as them. Somebody could misunderstand something when you're taking photographs. You're moving people around. Maybe you're sitting with them. Whatever, they might misunderstand something. And accuse me of something or whatever. So it's to protect them, but it's also to protect me. And as we see, these photos are now being used, and these photos could end up on the internet or whatever. And so yeah, child protection is sort of critical to what you're doing all the time. So just talking a little bit about sort of conversations and how they go. And this is particularly true. I mean, we've had these discussions around mansplaining, but it goes wider than that. Sometimes we think, this is a conversation. It's two people, they're chatting, it's all good. But really, this is what's going on, and I actually have a few relatives like this. You frankly can't turn them off. They just start talking, and they're off and running. And I think as leaders, there's a tendency sometimes, if you're leading a project, to just overtalk and to not really hear what's going on and not really observe. You're focused on your goals, you're focused on your presentation, and you're sort of like you just plow over people. I pulled this photo off the web. Most of these photos are mine, but a few I pulled off the web, and I just thought this is sort of a great kind of eye roll. We've all been in this kind of a situation, or worse, this kind of a situation. This actually is more my relatives. You just kind of feel like they're yelling at you. And I'm guessing with the U.S. election going on, there's probably a lot of this right now. People who are talking and just kind of yelling, and But I think as communicators, we need to be aware of this. I think it depends on. It's very much based on personality. I do think men typically are more like this, but let me tell you, I've had a few, one boss in particular, and she was a force to be reckoned with. And she was very much like this. And I'll maybe talk a bit about how I dealt with her. So yeah, it's not exclusive, but I think there is some mansplaining that goes on, and I've probably been guilty of it sometimes. So, again, the U.S. election, we all have filters. We all have biases. People hear different things. I mean, the election, I've learned so much from this election. Maybe it's just affirmed some of the things I already believed in terms of communications. But we hear so often what we want to hear, and holy cow, uh, the election is all about that. I mean, you've heard it before. Trump talks to his base. He talks to his base. In the very early days, I asked an American friend of mine. I was doing some work in the U.S. And I said, like, what is he thinking? And he just said to me, oh, he's talking to the people that want to listen to him, and he knows who they are, and he knows what they want to hear. And yeah, that's true for all of us, and it's true for Biden. It's just that he's probably less offensive about it. But Trump, say what you want about him. He has been a master in many ways, a master at communicating, saying what needs to be said to people who are going to support him. I mean, I think, again, we're shocked this election. There's a lot of people that voted for Trump, a lot. And I don't know, don't want to get into politics, but I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter. No offense if you are, but I don't get it, and I just keep shaking my head. Anyway, but yeah, we all have biases, and I just think it's really important to be aware of those, and I don't know, just kind of an illustration there of where we see those biases come up. So I guess just a question for you guys. I'm curious to know, in the kind of work that you're involved in or want to be involved in, or in your day-to-day life. I mean, are there filters that you can name that you have, or maybe your friends have? I'm just curious to hear what some of them might be. Anybody?
I think a lot of us as Christians might have a bit of a filter because of that, when hearing things, kind of filtering it through our Christian worldview.
Yeah, and just I always remember years ago. I was actually in high school, and I was very involved in a Christian. I didn't come from a Christian home. I was one of those guys that became a Christian as a teenager. I was drinking and doing all the stuff, typical stuff, and I became a Christian, and my parents, never really understood it. But I remember talking to kids and saying, well, I really felt the Lord wanted me to do this, or I think God was telling me this and that, and I learned a great lesson. One gal said to me, do you understand how arrogant you sound? You are telling me that you talk to God, that God is giving you a message. Do you understand? Like, that sounds crazy, and it sounds really arrogant. Like you have some kind of special connection to God. Now, evangelicals are like, well, yes, I do. I'm proud of that, and you can too. But that isn't the way it comes across to some people. What they hear is either you're crazy or you're arrogant and self-righteous. I talk to God. Why don't you talk to God? So I'm very careful about the way I talk about, that kind of relationship, because I think it for people who don't understand, I think it really does sound arrogant. So yeah, I think that's very important. I don't know. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about filters? All right, moving on. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. This is probably a large bulk of what I want to talk about is the medium. In other words, how do you communicate? What channel do you use? Because frankly, it's the fun part. It's the creative part. And obviously, everything is really about the message. When you look at, your filters or the feedback or what have you, how you communicate your message. I mean, the message is critical, of course, but how you communicate it is going to be paramount to so many other things. So I want to talk about sort of communications and how we can, some of the mediums that we use. And I'm just going to start off with social media to sort of get it out of the way. Listen, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I mean, partly I do it. I think initially I got on because I wanted to understand it. And I just wanted to sort of know, how it operates. I thought, as a communicator, I guess I gotta know these things. And if you're going to get into communications, you probably should be, whether you use it or not. is another question, but at least understand what it is and how it's used. And listen, I mean, we have seen, with this election, in the US, I mean, Twitter, is used a lot. So, Twitter's great, Facebook, they're good ways of communicating. They're inexpensive, they're easy to use. And then email. I mean, email is obviously the go-to for sending out messages, especially for staff, for colleagues, even on occasion, for board members, depending upon who it's coming from. But I also kind of throw in a bit of a caution, and that is that while most people have email, not everyone is on social media. Hope you understand that. I don't know. I'd be curious. Let me ask this question: how many of you don't have a Facebook page? I'm just curious. I think Phil doesn't. I know that. Is there anybody else that doesn't have Facebook? All right, so you all do. And how many of you are on Twitter? Anybody? All right. So there you go. Twitter is great for a lot of people, but it's not for everybody. Email, works pretty well. So yeah, social media is a good way of communicating, and it's cheap and easy, and everybody creates a Facebook page for your organization or your mission or whatever happens to be. It's useful. I took this picture in South Africa a couple of years ago, and I thought it was just like, wow, it really says it all. I'll tell you, in around the world, in developing countries, Africa, Asia, Latin America, everybody has a cell phone. They may not have a smartphone like you probably have and I have, but everybody has a cell phone. If you are a poor person in the slums of Nairobi, you probably have a cell phone. You can buy one for $30 or less. You can pick them up, and what's interesting about the way they use cell phones in a lot of places, in many places in Africa, is that it's a bit of a different system. They separate out voice from data. So here, when you buy a cell phone, you get voice. Then you pay extra for data. There, you get a cell phone, you get a very small amount of voice, and so people don't use it because it's expensive, but they get data because data is cheaper, and you can buy bundles of data. Mostly it's pay-as-you-go in most places in East Africa anyway. And then what people do is they use different apps to communicate using data, and so they use WhatsApp. So most people that I dealt with who are not, sort of wealthy, if they're kind of middle class, which means they make $30,000 or $40,000 a year, if that, they use WhatsApp, and they call each other on WhatsApp, and they don't use actual cell time. So it's a whole different kind of way of communicating, but they do use cell phones. And like I say, even people that don't have a lot of money will generally have a cell phone. You're probably familiar with M-Pesa, which is a way of transferring money by cell phone. It's revolutionized so many things. I think it came out of Kenya originally. So, you can buy groceries with M-Pesa. You just use your cell phone, you give a number and whatever. You can transfer money to your relatives and, in far off villages, just send M-Pesa. It's fantastic, and it's very hard to cheat on it. It can be done, I understand, but anyway. So just to say, cell phone is anywhere you go in the developing world, cell phones are used, even among poor people. But not maybe social media. A lot of people do have, accounts, but not everybody. So anyway, so back to just talking briefly about social media. I think we all understand that, it's great. Having said that, we also know it can be very dangerous. And if you are in an organization and you're going to use social media to promote your cause or a business or whatever, you need to have policies around how to use it. We know that celebrities have just said crazy things, or in some cases they've said things that they didn't think were crazy, but it's been but for some reason it was insensitive, or people perceived it to be that way, and they've lost followers, or what have you. And then there's Trump, who just what can you say? He just says stuff on Twitter. I was just listening to CBC just before coming in here, and I guess he's saying a lot of things about the election, and of course Twitter is trying to manage that, saying it's not true. And in fact, they've created a way in which some of those tweets are much harder to pass on, uh, so people can't replicate it. But of course, there are supporters who have figured out how to replicate it, so they misspell, Biden, and then it gets passed on. And but anyway, it's really just a caution that if you're using social media, obviously you need to be careful how to use it. And if you do use it, you need to have policies around how you use it, how you're going to communicate your project or your business using social media. In terms of channels, there's so many ways that you can communicate what you're doing. So during the Rwandan genocide, I was, which is before some of your time, I assume, during the Rwandan genocide, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed, I was asked to go over to help manage media in Rwanda, in neighboring Congo. So everybody was pushed out of Rwanda because of the genocide, and there were refugee camps, 6 or 7 refugee camps along the border in the Congo. There was somewhere around over 2 million people in those refugee camps, and we were responsible for feeding somewhere around 250 to 300,000 people every single day. We had 10 truckloads of food arriving every single day from the port up by the Red Sea, which is hundreds of miles, and it's a long haul to Congo from there, and basically through a couple of countries. And so we were in charge of feeding these refugees. And I was in charge of communications and liaising with the media. The media had all come, probably 150 to 200 media had come to this location, and they were all camping in a big field. I got 1,000 stories around this, but we don't have time for it. But anyway, and so I would actually go and I would just what I call schmooze with the media. Every day I'd go to the press briefing held by UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, or the UN, or whomever. And then I would wander over to where the media was, and I'd sit down with the guys from CNN, and they'd be like, "Hey, open the fridge, grab a drink." They had a generator and a fridge going and a tent, and I mean, it was craziness. Anyway, and basically start telling stories. They're like, "What are you up to?" And I'm like, "Well, we got this going on. We got this, that going on. Do you want to come visit our project? I met this mother. This is the story." And basically promote our cause to the media. My point here really is, no matter what you're doing, you can invite the media to tell your story. If it's a business, if it's a church and you have something new going on, you have local media, you have social media, you've got bloggers. There's people that you can talk to who may want to come out and tell your story. There's nothing like the credibility of somebody from the outside telling your story. The story of who you are and what you're about. This photo here was, so this is literally on the border. This is the bridge crossing between Rwanda and the Congo, and the French soldiers were there under Operation Turquoise, which is a whole nother story. But then they brought in UN soldiers, and they were Ethiopians. And so these Ethiopian soldiers arrived. It was kind of like the arrival of the UN, because the French were there under their own banner, doing their own thing, protecting certain groups that they wanted to protect. And so the UN arrived. So this is a big media story. So as a communications guy, you try to attach yourself to the story that's current, and we'll talk a bit about that later. But I'm just hanging out with the journalists and seeing what they're doing, and you're constantly saying, "Hey, what are you working on today? And where's the story going? And what's interesting to you?" And as well, I'm taking photos and documenting, because we needed it for our own stories, our magazines. We would send it out. This is when I was working with World Vision. I'd send out material. In those days, we didn't have email connection. We were just, it was a very basic kind of place we were staying. The electricity was run by a generator. We had a fax machine, and the fax machine actually ran off I would drive a Jeep up to the window and attach jumper cables to the Jeep battery, which would then run the fax machine. And then I would start the Jeep, and then I would fax out my reports every night. And then I'd have a satellite phone that ran off a battery. I would sleep on the floor in the communications room, and then I would receive phone calls, media interviews that had been set up around the world. You get a phone call from some station in California, and you're listening to the highway traffic, on the interstate or whatever. Then a commercial literally for Jock Itch. And then it's like, and now to Philmar in Rwanda. And you're just like, man, this is a crazy world. So anyway, so that was kind of, but that was dealing with the media, and okay, this is all very, it's a big story, whatever, but tiny little stories. You can get media, and I'm going to show you a couple of those a bit later. But I mean, give me a story, and we can figure out a way often of getting it into a small newspaper, your local newspaper, your local blogger, whatever it happens to be. And like I say, that's for credibility, because other people telling your story builds credibility for your cause. And if you have a particular mission, it's a great way of making it happen. This is I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but I thought I'd mention it. I know these folks a little bit. There's an organization that will disseminate news releases. So if you're working on a particular project, and you can promote it through the media, and these guys will send out your media release for you. There's a website there, CanadianChristianNewsService.com. In fact, I think most of these people studied at Tyndale. In fact, one of them, I taught a course once at Tyndale on communications, and one of them was in the course. But anyway, they distribute to about 192 media outlets, publications, radio, and then they send out to bloggers as well. And that's, as I've sort of mentioned before, bloggers are important, and don't forget to hit them up if you're trying to communicate something, because more and more they're reaching out. I did a podcast interview actually the other day, which I did very badly, and I'm not even going to tell you where it was, because I don't know. I did a lot of ums and ahs and stuff, and it was terrible. But anyway, it was long. Special events. So even if you're launching a small, project with a team of 5 or 6 people, you can have a special event. Pull out a cake. Take everybody for lunch. Buy Starbucks coffee for everybody. It's a way of launching your project and communicating that you appreciate them, and sitting them down and talking about whatever your project is. Making your project into a special event is a really effective way of communicating that there's a change, something is new. So this is something that I worked on. So I was in the tsunami, which, as you may recall, was hit Sri Lanka, Indonesia, India, and Thailand. And I ended up, I went to Sri Lanka, I went to India, I ended up where the worst damage was, which was in Indonesia, Banda Aceh, in Indonesia. And so we organized, Air Canada offered a flight. And so we organized an Air Canada flight, flying goods to Jakarta, Indonesia, the capital. And on the plane was all kinds of relief goods. And then the office in Mississauga organized a school to do drawings for children in Banda Aceh. And on the tarmac, the plane arrived. I was literally on the tarmac. On the plane, we took over journalists from, this guy here is from the Toronto Star, and in the middle, and there's other guys there from, Global and all the different Canadian media. And so they arrived on the plane. There was some seats at the front, and they got a free ride. Media are always into free rides. And so they got on the plane, they flew over. And some of them stayed, some of them actually got on the plane and flew back. They flew back through Hong Kong. And on the left here is the president of World Vision at the time, Dave Toyson. On the right here is the coordinator for programs. And this guy here, you can sort of see half of his head. He's the Canadian ambassador. So, you know, Dave from World Vision was giving these pictures to the ambassadors so that he could share them with children. So this was an event, obviously a special event. And as you can see, it was well attended. It got into the media. And, you know, there weren't really vloggers at that time so much. But if there were, we would have taken some, because it's a way of, you know, hitting a different set of people. And, you know, part of our goal was to position the organization, basically say, we're here, we're in Indonesia. And by the way, if you want to help, we're the organization you want to give to. And they raised a lot of money. And this was, you know, it was these kinds of things that really raised the profile of the organization working there. And also the pictures are a nice thing because, you know, part of the World Vision brand is children. So the discussion was, how do we get children involved in this? You know, do we have children come out and meet the plane? You know, how actually are we going to do this? Well, we're going to have, you know, pictures from children in Mississauga to children in Indonesia. It's sort of, you know, I thought it was a very clever way of helping to convey the brand, the message of who we are. So yeah, it was quite an event. But like I say, you're probably not going to be doing this kind of thing, but it just kind of shows you the kind of thing that can be done. You know, you can have there's a lot of events that you can do. You know, tie balloons around the office. I've seen that done. You know, and you know, people come in the office and it's like there's balloons everywhere. Yeah, we're launching our, you know, our new project. So, you know, it's just you know, it's a way of helping people to have a milestone. Oh, okay, this is the day it's being launched. Remember the balloon day? That was the launch day. Another thing that's used in development quite commonly, and I've seen it used all over, especially with agricultural programs, though not exclusively, is a thing called model farmers. So you have a new program that you want to introduce. Maybe it's a new seed, you know, maybe it's a different way of farming, and you pick farmers that you believe that are willing and able to try the new methodology, because getting farmers to change the way they do things is very difficult. My father-in-law is a farmer. He's a great guy, but boy, he farms the same way he's farmed for, you know, the last, you know, 25, 50 years, whatever. And because it works, you know, you're asking a farmer to try something new and he may lose his entire crop. So they're smart. They're like, yeah, I don't do highfalutin new stuff. I go with what works. So you have a couple of select farmers and they're model farmers, and they try the new solution, whatever it is, you know, and then you bring the old farmers by and you show them how it worked. And the model farmer says, yeah, it worked. I did this, I did that, and it's amazing, and I've increased my crop yield or my fish yield or whatever it happens to be. This particular picture is I took it about 2 years ago. The Christian Reformed Church has a fantastic program where they use basically low tillage and water preservation methods. I mean, really, all it is, it's very simple. It's putting mulch on your field. And the mulch, surprisingly, to us non-farmers, really helps because it holds the moisture in. And I visited 5 different farmers doing stories and talking to them and doing a survey with them. And every one of them was growing 4 to 5 times the amount of food that they had previously before. I mean, it was staggeringly successful, a really wonderful program. It's sort of in coordination with the Anglican Church, Christian Reformed Church, and they were doing it in 2 or 3 countries. It was a CETA-funded program, and they wanted me to interview female farmers, as I'm sure Phil may have mentioned. I don't know, the CETA is, you know, they want issues around women in particular, and so that's the stories they wanted to tell. So the model farmer idea is really a different kind of idea. It's really about communicating through influencers and thought leaders. And model farmers they're influencers, they're thought leaders. And so, you know, you can do that too. Whatever your program is, whatever you're involved in, you can always, bring in a local politician, somebody who's a specialist, an expert. Of course, organizations will use celebrities. Bono is well known for fighting hunger. uh, I was involved. I was going to throw some slides and I didn't. You may not remember the Live Aid concert. There was the Live Aid concert it was at Wembley Stadium, but then there was Live 8. And it was myself and a few other people that helped to organize the Live 8 concert, which took place in Barrie as a result of sort of the whole Geldof, Bono initiative, the One World initiative, to fight hunger around the world. And it was very successful. And Bono fighting hunger, now, of course, with the voting thing, there's lots of people who are supporting, Joe Biden or Trump for that matter. And so, using trusted people, to support your cause, can be very helpful. Of course, it can be very dangerous because when that celebrity, does something that is untoward. I mean, we've seen that with the Me Too movement. All of a sudden, they're your spokesperson. Now you have to kind of like, we used here in Guelph. I've done a lot of volunteer work with a small organization called Bracelet of Hope, and about, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we used Gian Gameshi as an MC. He was a great MC, very entertaining. Now, of course, Gian Gameshi is, his name is not one that you really want attached to your organization. So you have to be very careful. So I guess, the question to ask, when you're involved in a project is, who are your influencers? Who are the people that can influence your audience? And this is always about audience. So, if it's a project dealing with staff, maybe you want to somehow get a staff person that's respected, engaged in the process. It just depends on what your project is, and, the nature of what you're doing. I don't know. I mean, one of the things, of course, using celebrities for politics, I actually have a question as to whether that works or not. I'm not sure I'm going to vote for somebody just because Taylor Swift, or name whatever celebrity you like. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. She supports him, but I'm probably not going to change my vote. And I think that speaks to the fact that sometimes celebrities are really useful. Other times, it's neutral. World Vision used to use Alex Trebek. What that did was give credibility. People like, well, if Alex supports it, I guess I'll donate. And a lot of people, were like that. And so that's why you see a lot of organizations, nonprofits using celebrities, because it sort of gives instant credibility. If I don't know where my money's going, well, there's Alex, so I guess it must be going to the right place. So other times, I don't know. I think it's a wash. So it really depends. Any questions so far from anybody? Anything? It's okay if you don't. Just asking. Feedback.
I was just going to maybe add to what you were saying in terms of the influencers, because I think that's a really important statement. Finding those influencers or champions for your brand, and even within a project, your project has a brand as well, right? By its nature and name. And sometimes you partner in projects with companies, with mining companies, or maybe with Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Nike, and then suddenly a scandal breaks out in one of those companies, and suddenly that comes pouring back on your project as well. So you're kind of branded by association, not just to celebrities, but
right,
partners even, right? So
yeah, and it doesn't always, I mean, again, sometimes, so we, I don't have photos of it. There were some great photos, but I noticed on our donor list when I was working with the Christian Children's Fund, I noticed that Katrina LeMay Doan was a child sponsor. By the way, Ian Hannah Mansing was a child sponsor. But anyways, Katrina LeMay Doan, and she before your time, I'm sure, and almost before mine, but she won 2 gold medals and a silver medal in speed skating. I mean, she was a name. In fact, she led when the Winter Games took place in Vancouver. She was the one that led the Canadian delegation with the flag. I talked to her about it. She said, "Oh, it was top secret. I couldn't tell anybody, and but it's an honor, So she led the flag, and does a lot of speaking now. It's kind of what she does full time. But I saw she was a donor, so I called her up and I said, "Listen, we'd love to use you for some of our campaigns, for some of our TV programs, and etc. in our magazine and stuff. And would you be willing to visit your sponsored child in Ethiopia?" And she said, "Man, I'd love to. It'd be fantastic." So we went over to Ethiopia and we did some amazing stuff with her. She was fantastic on camera, lovely person, enjoyed working with her. And we produced, the videos, put them all together, ran the commercials, ran the TV shows. Didn't work. Just now, I'm sure people liked her. It wasn't a bad thing. It probably probably some people are like, "Oh, I'm glad I support that organization. She's a good person." So the other side of it too is sometimes just affirming people. So even with the Taylor Swift example, maybe I'm thinking about Biden, maybe I'm not sure, but Taylor, okay, well, yeah, she supports it. Okay, well, I guess, there's kind of the halo effect, right? But yeah, she was great, loved her, fantastic, good on camera. Didn't really work. Didn't really move the needle in terms of people wanting to sign up. So you just never know, and who knows? Could have been a lot of reasons. So another program that we were involved in was the Ban the Landmines campaign, and I've been in places in Mozambique, Angola, Cambodia, places where those probably the three countries, if I think hard, are probably the three most influenced countries by landmines, or maybe others, but those are three key places. And so anyways, there was a whole campaign to ban landmines, ban anti-personnel landmines. Not, there are other kinds of mines, but anyway. And so, we were involved. These are anti-tank mines, these two here. These two are like a bouncing Betty. You step on one of these and then it shoots in the air, 3 or 4 feet in the air, and then it explodes and hits people in the chest. I actually have a few original real souvenir landmines here in my house. I got one of these. These cost about $1. It just looks like a hockey puck and it's got a little pad. They're so cheap to make. And it's an anti-personnel mine. This is sort of an older Portuguese style. Anyways, these are mines, all over the world, and we know mines are bad. So there was a campaign to ban landmines, and so we wanted to raise awareness to this and communicate that message to people in Canada, and so we put together a minefield using sensors in High Park in Toronto. And so then we organized with high school students, and we had busloads of high school students come in, and they would walk through the minefield. And when they'd hit a mine, a very loud siren would go off, and there'd be a flashing light. So then we'd go out to them and we'd say, "Okay, so you've lost your arm and whatever, a leg or whatever it happens to be. So now we want you to gather firewood." And we had wood. And so now the idea was, they'd go and see what it's like to gather firewood if they didn't have an arm or leg or whatever happens to be. And it was very, very successful. Here, some guys, got a crutch and an arm, and the other guy's blind. And, it was a great education for the students, but really the students were kind of the secondary audience. The real audience was media, because, we wanted something visual that the media could see. They could capture video of it. And it's local, it's Toronto, it was High Park, so it's not too far from downtown. We got a major cover story in like a half-page story in the Toronto Star. We had Global, CBC, and then there's also the lead up. There's radio interviews, all of that kind of stuff. And it was a very successful campaign in terms of raising the awareness to getting countries and Canada to sign onto the landmine treaty. So as you may or may not remember, the landmine treaty was actually signed in Ottawa because this guy here is Lloyd Axworthy, a much younger Lloyd Axworthy. Basically we got 100, not us alone, but I mean, it was a global campaign, but 150 countries signed the convention against anti-personnel landmines. US has never signed, by the way, but that's another story. So, 150 countries signed the anti-personnel landmine treaty. Because landmines, they're still in the ground. They're still pulling them out of the ground. There's what they call deminers in Mozambique. Farmers are farming and they hit a mine or whatever. So a very successful campaign, and again, as an organization, it branded us as cutting edge, dealing with relevant issues, and caring about people, caring about children. It was always building the brand. We had a guy who knew the landmine stuff. We had an expert they could talk to about the scourge of mines and how it affects people and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it worked quite well. Again, it's just another example of how you can communicate messages using special events. This one, a very unique special events. But if you're in a church or whatever, they do things like this, things where you eat a bowl of rice for 2 days, that's all you eat, or you camp out as a refugee in a tent, or different things like that. Helps people to understand. It communicates a message, and if you're trying to build profile, you can promote that to bloggers, social media, traditional media, what have you. Another program I was involved in was in South Lebanon. Now, South Lebanon is a very interesting place because it's basically controlled by Hezbollah. So when you get to South Lebanon, you sort of cross into it, and literally a guy appears from over a hill, and he's like got an AK-47 and a Tommy Hilfiger jacket, and he's the Hezbollah guy because the Lebanese government doesn't really control that area, and it's right along the border with Israel. So I drove right down to the border, like there's sort of 50 feet of landmines and then a pillbox. That's Israel. So anyway, we had this, we were trying to build peace initiatives between different groups, actually, Christians, Jews, and Muslims in the area. And one of the programs that we had was an agricultural program. So really, this is just kind of an example of a community announcement or formal announcement. Obviously, in your organization, you can stand up all the staff and announce something and make it into a big deal. This was funded by the Japanese government, and so all the people from the community came, mostly manual notice, because it is an Islamic area. And on the right, we've got a girl who's going to give flowers to the Japanese ambassador. This guy over here to the right actually was the security guy for the Japanese ambassador, who this is him here, actually, who had a very nice suit, worth a lot of money, I'm sure. Anyway, formal announcement is always is a good way to communicate, or one way, anyways. But of course, community meetings and announcements don't have to be in some building. This is in West Africa, where we got this community together, and we were announcing a program, and I was the only white guy that was there. And so, as tradition, they gave me 2 chickens, which I didn't really want, but I got 2 chickens anyway. I gave them to the driver. He was very happy to have them. Of course, I just I took them, and the driver kind of stuffs them under the seat, and you're like, oh man, this is just a different world. Anyway, but yeah, community meeting, and community meetings in Africa are fantastic, right? Because there's you go in, if it's in East Africa, there'll be chairs for the honored guests and palm fronds, and you sit on them on some little stage or something, and a welcome sign. There will always be dancing. There was dancing here. I didn't show pictures of it, but singing, dancing, and either a meal or, you know, they'll bring out a case of Coke and you'll all, you know, have a Coke together. So anyway, but obviously you can do community meetings, you know, whatever your project is, you get people together. Town halls are a standard thing now. Politicians do them. It's just, but they can go wrong too, because people will ask questions, and so you just need to make sure you've got somebody who can answer the questions. Community meetings, you get a lot of people that have a lot of opinions, and so, you know, they do need to be managed, you know. So personal interviews, so this is many years ago. Basically this is in Haiti, during a crisis there, and you know, you can do media scrums and all of that kind of stuff, but sometimes you just want to do a personal interview because it allows you to communicate your messages in a very, you know, personal way. This is, you know, doing TV, but obviously you can do, you know, podcasts, newspaper interviews, you know, you can do Q&A on Facebook. There's lots of different ways of communicating with your audiences. This was set up on the roof of a building, and this was actually for CBC. There's a thing called the European Broadcasting Unit, and often when there's a disaster, they fly in satellites and all kinds of gear, and they just set up, and all the media just go to them, and they do interview after interview after an interview for whatever, Dutch TV, German TV, American TV, and then they all pay into it. So it's just a way of having a centralized satellite uplink. But anyway, the point really is just individual interviews with either staff or recipients. You know, unique situations call for unique ways of communicating, and this is going back to Cambodia, and again, you'll notice I don't show the girl's face on the right. So one of the things they do is, you know, they go through counseling sessions, and one of the ways of sort of neutralizing some of the discussion to make it easier to talk is they use you know, dolls and things like that, this sort of happy, funny little dog. And, you know, they'll do things like, you know, what would you say to my friend about this or that? I mean, you don't want to re-traumatize, but there's a whole strategy, at least, of getting people to talk about it, find out kind of what happened. And so I this is just a setup, actually. I said, just show me kind of what, you know, this kind of a thing would look like. And, you know, the point being that, you know, what I'm suggesting here is that, you know, this little puppet is the medium. You know, that's the way they're communicating. It's obviously a conversation, but it's using, you know, a very different, a creative way of communicating with this gal. So questions, thoughts about sort of about channels, the medium that you use to communicate? I don't know, anybody got thoughts or anything you want
to? What would you say is the most common medium that you've used?
Wow. I mean, I've done a lot of media stuff, but media is a lot of what I did. You know, what I'll say about media for organizations, no matter who you are, I think there's large, medium-sized organizations. Larger ones typically are better at it, but there's medium-sized organizations that don't milk traditional media enough, and they're frightened of it. Journalists are scary. They don't really know how to sell a story. And I think also social media, I mean, of course we all do social media, but frankly, it's lazy. I think it's good, it's great, use it, but it's one-way communication. It's that guy with the loudspeaker. He's yelling at you, you know, we're doing this. Don't know whether you like it or not. Nah, there's room for Facebook responses, but if you can get traditional media, that means radio, television, newspaper, and I don't mean big newspaper, like, you know, I'll show you later, Guelph Mercury or Guelph Today, little tiny, you know, a newspaper, but it reaches a lot of people online. So yeah, the thing about traditional media is that social media feeds off of it. You know, people don't you know, you put stuff on Facebook and Twitter, and yeah, if you're Trump, it gets repeated, but mostly it doesn't. And so you're communicating to people, and that's okay. But if you get a story in the newspaper in Guelph today, like you know, I have for this small organization, we tweet that out, we Facebook that, we send that to our board members. Look what we got. You know, we send it to our donors. We reprint it. Here's what we're doing. Please donate. Here's the great work. We're being respected. It's about credibility. And if you can tell a story, if somebody else will tell your story, it's huge credibility. So, I mean, I just, you know, media, you know, traditional media, and traditional media is morphed. Like I say, it's all online now. If you're on CBC, that's online. You know, you Google CBC Kitchener, you'll hear an interview I did from Nepal. It's online. So you know, traditional media is not so traditional. So yeah, I think that's and just getting other people to tell your story is really good, whether it's a journalist. I think the other thing that's really effective, and it depends what you're trying to do, but is getting as we did, like getting Katrina LeMaidon to visit our projects. So I took a Toronto Sun reporter over to India. He did a 5-part series on AIDS in India. Some were our projects, some weren't. They used all of my photos, and it was for the week of the International AIDS Conference in Toronto. I don't think that's online, but it probably was at the time. But you know, and so if you can show people your project, whatever it happens to be, you know, they'll presumably buy into it, and then they'll tell the story and give you credibility. So yeah, that's, I mean, we did that a lot. So yeah.
I find it really interesting what you were saying about the mainstream media really drives social media. Because I think in a lot of people's minds, probably we think social media is where a lot of people are getting that information from directly now as the source. One of the questions I've always had, and this is where I've run into problems with the media, is controlling the narrative. And where do you think is the most control for an organization like a charity to be able to control a narrative? Maybe what's more easy and what's more difficult, maybe.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think first off, you want to be honest, you know, with media. You know, there's a bit of a notion out there of PR people, watch out for him. Well, yeah, sure. I'm going to tell the good stories. I'm not going to tell you the bad stories. But I don't know. I sometimes will say, yeah, you know, this. I try to be humble. I'm like, here's what we're doing. It doesn't always work, but mostly it does work, you know, kind of thing. You know, I was kind of say there are occasions when this isn't successful for lots of good reasons. We don't always get it right. You know, the guy I worked with, the head of World Vision at the time, was a great guy. And he always said that. He said, here's what we decided. Maybe it wasn't the right decision, but at the time, given what we knew, it was the right decision. And I was like, wow, I think that's quite clever. So I think being humble, I think there are ways of managing, and you're not always going to be successful, but there are ways of trying to manage. If I'm in an interview and I feel like you don't want to be in an interview for too long, you talk too much and you start saying stuff. Like for me, I want to convey my key messages, and then I'm done. So it's like, yeah, great, happy to do an interview. Now I've got 30 minutes. At the end of that, I really need to go. And so he's going to ask his key questions. And then at the end of 30 minutes, if it's going well, you're like, we'll just keep going. You know, oh, well, I got another 5 minutes, right? But if you think, okay, I think I've gone as far as I want to, I'm like, well, it's my 30 minutes. It's been great meeting you. So I control the conversation that way. There's a lot of little things you can do. You know, one of the best things, if you don't, you know, there's in media relations, a thing called bridging. If you don't know the answer to something, that's great. Because you say, you know, how many people died? I don't know that. What I can tell you is that the people that have died are suffering, and it's horrible. And here's what I've seen. Well, now you're off on another story, and it's a story about, you know, whatever you've seen, which is maybe even better. So, you know, there are different sort of bridging techniques where you can sort of direct the conversation. So yeah, there are ways, but I mean, I always remember I was interviewed by Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera has its uses, but they have a certain bias. All media has a bias, but they have a certain bias. They're kind of anti-American. If there's a bad American story, that's the story they're going to tell. And I always remember sitting outside our kind of building in kind of some swampy area, actually. And they really wanted to hear what America was doing. I'm a Canadian and it's an international team. And they were like, so now you're here. Now your money, it's coming from America. I'm like, yes. America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, Germany, Switzerland. It's coming from all over the world. So now, what does America, why are they here? I'm like, well, America's not here. We have a couple of Americans, but we have Australians, Germans, New Zealand. I'm a Canadian. I was continually sort of pulling it back. They really somehow wanted, like, America was there, I don't know, to convert the Muslims. I'm not sure what their agenda was. So yeah. But yeah, it's a challenge sometimes trying to control them, but there are some techniques. Controlling time was one of my personal favorites, and you can always go over. If it's going well, it's like, yeah, I'm going to stick around, keep talking, So anyway, that's media relations. It's a whole, it's a science in and of itself. So, okay. And the next parts are shorter. Going to talk a bit about the message. So, message is important, obviously. And so I'm sort of just want to talk a bit about sort of, communications and messages. And so I was working at the Christian Children's Fund and I'd visit the field. The signs, I will be honest, they drove me crazy. By the way, they've changed the name to Children Believe. So it's a new name now. It's no longer Christian Children's Fund, which is maybe an interesting discussion topic. But anyways, so the first question asked, anytime you're communicating with any one of these slides, the question always asked is, who's your audience? That'll determine the message, how you say it, how you're going to communicate it, when, all that stuff. If you want to sound intelligent in a meeting, somebody says, we should do this, think for a moment and say, who's our audience? People are like, oh yeah, that's a really good question. That's how to sound intelligent and, be a dummy. So anyway, Christian Children's Fund, they'd have these signs, and I would just scratch my head. I arrived first time, and I'm sort of like, do you think that the people who are that have this project, this is this is out in the boondocks, it's almost a desert, Burkina Faso. And, do you think they care that it's PJ 728? That's the project number? Like, I'm sure they don't care, and they don't know. Now, there are reasons sometimes you have to put it there because, there's some agreement. I don't know what, but mostly it's irrelevant. And then they've got program 62501. Why are you telling me this? And then they've got the short form, Christian Children's Fund, CCFC. The other one, ACCED. I find in developing countries, acronyms, India does this a lot, but Africa does as well. I always love revolutionary groups in Sudan. It's the Sudan People's Liberation Army, the SPLA, whatever, or in Somalia, it's the Somalis Liberation Front for Peace and Freedom. I'm like, hey man, come up with a short name. But anyway, that's just a side joke. But anyway, so, my point here, right, is there's just a lot of information, and sometimes there's just too much information, and just keep your message as simple as possible. And one of the challenges with Christian Children's Fund, and one of the reasons they changed the name, is it's a long name and it just doesn't work well. And of course, here they're doing this with the Assemblies of God, and they had their logo on it. You had your logo on it. It made signs a bit complicated. But here they've got Christian Children's Fund twice. They got it in the logo, and then they got it at the bottom. Again, it's just way too much information, and in my view, and maybe there's reasons for it, but I asked, and I would always ask, and I'd say, why do you have it twice? And they'd kind of smile and laugh and say, yeah, I guess, yeah, we don't really need that. I'm like, I don't think you do. This is kind of ensure your message is saying what you wanted to say to that audience. This is in Afghanistan. I love this sign. It's one of my favorite signs. The monopolistic agency of Sherrod Cement. Do you want people? Now, maybe it works in Afghanistan. I don't know how to speak, what do they speak there?
It's Pashtun. Yeah.
Pashtun, yeah. I don't know how to speak Pashtun or read it or Arabic or whatever. But monopolistic just doesn't work. I have another one. I didn't put it in here. It's an advertising company in India, and they have it underneath their billboards. They advertise whatever, diapers and alcohol and cigarettes and whatever, big billboards, and it's called propaganda advertising. Which I just love the name. It's like, yeah, well, that's what it says. It's propaganda advertising, and that's what you're doing. Anyway, my point really is just that sometimes you're and this gets into filters. Sometimes you're saying things that you don't really mean to say in your communication. Just really some fun examples here, just from all over the world. This is actually in India. So this is sort of on the back of the door, and out of Asia. It's maybe the translation, and no offense, I love Asia. It's a great place, and they're wonderful people. I mean no offense, but it just, I love some of these things like, please close your door softly and speak gently. People are loud, and so please close your door softly. I also like, so there's sort of an arm twisting going on at the end here. It's like, we expect your kind cooperation, which just seems like we're expecting it. It's a bit Gestapo-ish. They could have run it through somebody that really understands English. Clearly they didn't. Do not pluck flowers or disturb birds and animals. This is also one of my favorites. This is from India. And it's communicating with stakeholders. Basically, it's people that can take the train. And these are the rules for people that get discounts. There's like 24 different groups of people that get a variety of discounts, 50%, 75%. They get free rides. I just wonder if there isn't a better way of communicating this or doing this. Some of the stuff I looked up, number 18, Thessalomia major disease patients alone or with attendant. Thessalomia, I looked it up, is some kind of a blood disease or ailment. I'm surprised that one ailment gets, maybe the president's relative has it and they get a discount. I'm not sure. Yeah, and I like the one at the bottom too, because you kind of know what's going on here. Press correspondent accredited to the headquarters of Government of India State Government, union territories and district headquarters, traveling up to 30,000 kilometers per annum on bona fide press-related work. In other words, you can't bring your wife, you can't go on holidays and take your family and get a discount. Anyway, I just thought it was kind of an interesting observation about communicating with your stakeholders. I guess it's effective. Maybe it works in that culture. I guess it does. But it's complicated. So, you want to keep your messages simple to, when you're creating a message for media, bloggers, whatever, generally you create 3 messages. They're simple. It's 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences. And if you're doing an interview on sexual abuse, with a local radio station, one of your key messages will be, if you take part in sexual abuse, you'll be thrown in jail. That's it. That's your key message. It's no more complicated than that. It gets the message across. And this is funded by Canadian government, and these are posters that our organization was head up. And what I like about the poster is, it's very locally done. You can tell, of course, which is fine, but you can see the problem and you can see the result. If you don't listen, you'll be thrown in jail. It's great. It's clear. It works. And in all of your messaging, great example. Here's another one. I took these off walls. It's amazing how often you see a poster and it's not level. It's just kind of slapped up on a wall. Anyway, you will go for marriage. No, I want to be in school. Basically, stop early childhood marriage. So again, if you are, if you're a person that's involved in preventing sex abuse, one might be, if you abuse children or anybody, you'll be thrown in jail. Second message you might want to convey is stop early childhood marriage. That's it. That's the message. And in your interview, somehow you're going to try to convey those messages, and you're going to try to convey them 2 or 3 times, because they may edit the interview out. If it's a newspaper article or if it's a speech, people may not hear it. So as much as possible, those are the messages you want to keep conveying. Simple messaging. I went to the Black Lives Matter rally here in Guelph, and it's effective. Black Lives Matter. What else do you have to say? It's simple, it's to the point, and that's part of the reason I think it's successful. I mean, there's a lot of reasons it's successful, but the motto itself works. Justice, no peace, I can't breathe. Perfect. That was the Black Lives Matter thing. We get it. It's about George Floyd. We understand it. It's really like one sentence, and there's so much being said there. It's simple. So a little so there are 8 keys to telling a good story, and I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly, and I'll send this stuff to you. Basically, and these are standard, like you'll see this 20 different ways. This is kind of what you learn in journalism school, and usually these terms or similar terms. And again, this is for bloggers, anything, just any story. So immediacy, basically stuff that's just happened. And, we could talk about the election. We could talk about the me to we could talk about Rob Ford just announced new levels for COVID, levels of quarantine. That's immediate. Proximities, things that are geographically close. So COVID-19 in your neighborhood, people want to hear stories about that. That's what they want to hear. We're all affected by that. Prominence, is it topical? So things that are topical right now: disease, democracy, how a mask protects people, increase in beer sales. I just heard a story on that. Those are topical things. They're prominent stories in the media. If you have a story that you can attach to that, that's a story people will want to hear. Oddity. So basically, I saw a story that ran the other day about they put 2 watermelons down, and they carved Biden's face into one and Trump's into the other. An elephant went for the Biden watermelon, and the joke is, well, Biden's going to win. Trump tweets, they're usually unusual. They're kind of odd. That's why, in some ways, they're just so much fun to watch. Conflict. I think, unfortunately, we all want to see stories of conflict. We don't really, maybe we don't want to, but we're attracted to stories of conflict. The election in the U.S. right now, Belarus rioting in the streets, the killing in France, Quebec, the guy that got beheaded or whatever, it was, with the sword. That's sort of, conflict. Cliffhangers. I think the election in the U.S. right now is the biggest cliffhanger. Like I've checked it 10 times today to see like where it's at. Emotions. So, stories about emotions, or stories that are emotions, bring about emotions. We want to hear those. And stories about businesses closing are very emotional. Those are stories that interest us. And consequences. If you don't wear a mask, what's going to happen? And on another level, if you don't save for retirement, what's going to happen? That's consequences. So those are sort of the 8 elements of news. We did this kind of thing. I went to North Korea, and we did a big news conference, and it worked because all the media came out. It was relevant because it's kind of local. It's North Korea, not far from Hong Kong. North Korea was in the news. It had all of the elements, and it was effective. And again, you're not going to do big things like this, perhaps, but on a smaller scale, you can do something similar. This is, when you're putting together your messages, you can look at, what you're building your messages on. So these are some of the things that we want to take into consideration. We would take into consideration a Christian Children's Fund. We want to manage our reputation. We want a good human resources department because that helps to maintain, a solid organization with, proper management. So, just thinking about putting together your messages. What is your organization about? And it's partly about branding. And, McDonald's has a brand, UNICEF has a brand. You can see these online, just download them. But my point here really is to say, no matter what you're doing, no matter how small the organization is that you're working with, you can have a brand. So Bracelet of Hope, this organization in Guelph, we raise under $500,000, around $400,000 or so. We have no staff here in Guelph. We have staff in Africa, but we have a branding, guideline, how to use the logo. but it's more than a logo. Brand is also about who you are, what you're about, what you believe in. It's a whole bunch of other things, because when people see brand, they think, well, that's just the color and the logo. No, branding is much deeper than that. And finally, just feedback. I just have a few thoughts here on feedback. Feedback relates to two different things. One is, is your communication effective, but it's also feedback about, is your program successful? Is your program, effective? And, communication plays a role in all of that. You can build feedback while you're doing your plan, which I highly recommend. If you're doing even a draft, sit down with staff, walk through the draft, get feedback from them on your project plan. And I generally don't present anything unless most people have already seen a version of it. Otherwise, they're surprised, like, whoa, I didn't know where this was going. And I tailor my presentation to what they tell me about what they're looking for. I mean, assuming we're headed in the same direction. There's a thing called the Abilene paradox, and if you go online, look it up on YouTube. Basically, Abilene paradox is where everybody agrees to do something, mostly because the boss said, let's do it. And it's a story about going to Abilene for ice cream, and they all get back, and nobody really wanted to go. But the father-in-law said, well, let's go to Abilene. And everybody's like, well, okay, I guess so. And there's a lot of projects that get started because the boss says, let's do it, but nobody really agrees to it. Why? No feedback. He didn't listen, perhaps. He didn't ask, and people didn't offer. We can do group discussions. This is in Nepal. This is actually the International Aid Director for the Pentecostal Church, and getting some feedback on the program that they were doing there related to a distribution during the earthquake. I worked in China, where this man on the right is a Canadian based in Montreal, but he ran a program in China, and he would sit down with recipients and talk about, how the program is going. Have we communicated properly? Do you understand what we're about? Answer any questions, just meeting with staff, talking to them. I think you all know SurveyMonkey, great way of getting feedback if you want to do it digitally on, success of your program. Sudan, we would go out into the field and sit down with people after giving out ag packs, find out how far the ag packs went, to what villages, and if the instructions of the ag pack were clear, do we communicate it properly on how to use them? And as well, we'd check to see whether the food had arrived and, how it was being stored, because, sometimes you're giving out food and it isn't being stored properly. All just kind of feedback loops. There's a simple truth about feedback, and it is simply, if you're talking, you're not listening. And I sure have been guilty of that. And sometimes, we're just not asking enough questions. So this is the end. I have a little homework for you. Phil can adjust this as he wants, but here's my suggestion. So create 3 key messages for your CEO. That your CEO should communicate in speeches, for interviews, and podcasts. So as I've shared with you, key messages can be very simple. A sentence, that's it. So I've created this fictional organization called Stop Malaria. So you want 3 messages. One that relates to your organization, who you are. You can make that up. Just a simple message about what Stop Malaria is as an organization. Secondly, a message about why I should help. Why do I care? Malaria. I live in Canada. Why do I care about malaria? And thirdly, a call to action. So, okay, great, you're here. What do you want me to do about it? So the good news is a key message is just 1 or 2 sentences. That's it. It's bite-sized. And so it shouldn't be a lot of work. Otherwise, I hate creating work for people. So basically, these are the messages that your CEO or spokesperson should communicate during an interview, a podcast, whatever it happens to be. And I'll send you this so you've sort of got it. It's relatively simple, he says, he hopes. That's it. Basically my final comment is the most important thing regarding communication is to actually think about it. Don't wing it. There's a tendency to just kind of like, well, yeah, we'll figure this out, just, hopefully, looking at this and other things you're learning from Phil, it's think about community. How am I going to communicate in my project to the various stakeholders, to the board, to the staff, whoever it happens to be. Think about how you want to communicate, the different, the mediums, the channels you want to use, and the feedback you're going to use in order to find out how useful it was. You can follow me on Twitter, and I'll get Phil to send you if you want to. I do write articles, and I send out alerts, and if you want to get on that, I can send you stuff. So, anyways, that's it. Thank you
very much. Thank you. Fantastic. Great presentation, Philip. Thank you. You guys can hear me okay? Is my mic working?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. Sometimes it does wonky things. So I just, I really appreciate the presentation. And I just want to reiterate that communications, and from the years and years that I've been doing project management, communications is throughout your whole project management experience, right? It's not a standalone thing. It's not something else that happens outside of your project. It's very much integral to everything you're doing within your project. So whether you're doing it directly, communications directly, or whether as a project manager you're working with a communications team or somebody like Philip Marr, you need to be aware of the elements that he's raised. You've got to keep in mind, I think these are such important points he's raised, like who's your audience, keep your message short and clear, watch your filters, but knowing that all important audience. But I'll just want to ask a quick question, and then I'm going to hand over to you guys if you have any questions for Philip. Not all project managers are ready when they go out in the field to tackle something like communications, because it does take a certain skill, it takes a certain experience, whether it's with media or whoever it's with. So how would you say project managers could gain the skill for communicating through these different mediums? Like if one of the class here graduates, gets posted over there to manage a project, how could they go about getting that kind of skill they need to actually deal with communications in the media?
Right. I think probably, experience obviously is worth a lot, and I do think that when if you decide you want to do media or whatever it happens to be, my guess is the first time you do it, you're going to learn a lot. I find the first time I do anything, it's sort of my biggest learning. But there is a huge amount of stuff online. There's a huge amount of stuff on on YouTube about all of this stuff. There are books out there about communications. And it is a skill, and I do think, I'm a photographer as well, and I'm frustrated sometimes because I think people feel like, well, I got a smartphone now, I can take a photograph, and you know what, you can take a great photograph with a smartphone. I'm not denying that, but having somebody that actually has experience and talking to them and getting them to share with you. Is a great way of obviously learning how to do this. One of the things I used to do, you do a lot of tricks, right? So if I wanted to get into a newspaper, so I would, I had a story I wanted to tell, and I would call up a newspaper, Toronto Star, could be anybody, right? And people love giving advice. I mean, Phil asked me to do this. I'm like, yeah, sure, love to do it. It'd be fun, people love giving advice, mostly, especially if you're respecting them and it's from their experience. I'd call up the Toronto Star. I'd call just about any journalist that was relatively close to what I wanted to talk to, and I'd say, "Hey, it's Philip Marr. I have a story here. I know you can't do the story. This isn't really your area, but I wonder if you can recommend me, how I can tell this story, or and who might be interested in the story." And the thing is, they love that because it was a sigh of relief. Okay, you're not trying to sell me. Great, thank you. Because they hate saying no. It's just, even though they're gruff journalists, they don't like it. And I would just ask for advice. So I actually recently, during the COVID, I had a friend of mine here in Guelph. Her father died in Pickering at that home where they brought in the military, and she's got this horrible story about how he died and all this kind of stuff. And this was sort of early days, and she was just livid. And she's a very smart person. She is She's one of the smartest people I know. She's an occupational therapist. And anyways, and I said, do you want to tell your story? That should be in the newspaper. She's like, I do. I called up a guy, actually a guy that I knew that I was in East Timor with when that place melted down. We camped out in a tent, and he was working with the Globe and Mail. And we haven't talked in a long, long time. And I called him up and I said, it's, what's his name? Guy, something Guy. I forget his first name, G-E-E. Anyways, and I called him up and said, hey, it's Phil, East Timor. Listen, I got this story. I know you're not the health guy, but who might be interested in this? Do you think they'd be interested? And how can we tell the story? He was like, hey, Phil, great to talk to you. Listen, talk to this person. Listen, tell them I recommended it. And, here's the way to tell the story. So I went back to my friend. I told her, and, she called up this woman and she's quoted in the Globe and Mail. That was like, whatever, 2-3 months ago. So yeah, people love, so to find a communications person who knows whatever the topic is and say, hey, I need some advice. How would you suggest I promote this? Or I want to hold an event. Got any ideas? You're good at events. So that's just my thought.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question? I'll throw it out there to everyone. Some burning issues or questions around communications, or even something local to your environment here? Not necessarily to projects, but we've got our expert here now, so here's your chance. One of the, just while they're thinking, one of the issues that I've always struggled with, where it's always sort of come back and it's very difficult to control, is with the advent of social media. As a project manager, everyone now, like you said, everyone has a phone and everyone's connected. And as a project manager, you got to make tough choices sometimes. And especially when it gets to letting people go in your project, and then those people immediately go on social media and start making up all kinds of, stuff about the project and things you're doing. And projects are sensitive. You're in a sensitive environment, a foreign environment. You're an agency potentially that, relies on the good faith and credibility that it's built, that currency within our country. And then somebody goes and throws that out in social media and it just goes viral. And I've always struggled with that. And can you talk maybe just a little bit about that, Philip? Just maybe your experience with that kind of chaos and
yeah, that's very difficult. So I was just talking to somebody in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is just they deal with the refugees in the south, the Rohingya, and I mean, the stories that get passed around that are just patently false about NGOs, and they're stealing money and all kinds of craziness that goes on. As much as possible, they try to do things openly. They try to consult everybody, try to explain what's going on. Even sometimes still stuff, just lies get told. And it is very difficult to handle. I mean, the only thing you can do really is to hit it direct on and just say, that's just not true. And this was the process, and we have an open process, and that's also why I mentioned earlier, one of the foundations is having a good human resources either department or at least some kind of human resources process that's open and transparent, because people get let go and people wonder, and people are always going to wonder, it's very difficult. But if you have a decent HR department, people at least will say, well, I know the HR department, I don't like what's going on, but I do think that they act, faithfully, and, they take care of people. And that's also why a lot of organizations will pay extra amount, like, even though you're only entitled to whatever, 2 weeks salary or 5 weeks salary, they'll give them 10, because then people can't complain, well, I got cheated. So yeah, it's an HR issue, and that's a challenging one.
Yeah, for sure it is. Yeah. Okay, well, any last questions from anybody before we thank Philip and let him go? Last chance? Okay. All right, Philip. Well, look, thank you so much. You've brought a wealth of experience and knowledge on this subject, and extremely beneficial. So I really want to thank you on behalf of everybody for joining us tonight and sharing that during the short little time that we had. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you all. All right. Good luck.
Take
Thank you very
care.
much.
We'll see you. Thanks. And we're gonna take a 15-minute break, everyone. Mandated by the university. I forgot that I'm supposed to do that. So so we'll be back here. It's about almost 22. So let's get back here. Let's say I don't know, 5 to 9, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. Thanks. just wondering if Alicia and Nick are there. Are you guys there? Or Vanessa
Yeah,
as well? Yeah.
I'm here.
You guys are there? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
I'm
great.
here.
Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so anything came up during the break, guys, that you're curious about from the last speaker, or any questions that you have before we move on?
I was actually curious, wouldn't, in regards to the question that you asked about backlash from disgruntled ex-employees and stuff, wouldn't most organizations have people under NDA?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, a lot of them do, but when you're dealing with local staff, it's a whole different ballgame, right? Because they're in their national country, and you guys are a foreign presence in a way, and they feel protected. And the local laws are sometimes a little different. So our NDAs signed from Canada with our staff don't always apply in law in local countries. And even if it did, sometimes they just don't care, and they'll even go on with anonymous handles when they go on their labels, and you don't really know. I mean, we know who said it, but nobody else does. The thing that really messes it up is it doesn't take much in the charity business to really mess up reputation and branding. You just have to plant that seed. It's like, it's just like he said about what's going on with Trump. You just got to say one thing, and whether it's true or not, people will believe it. And so it's a very difficult, very sensitive aspect of management, and we just have to be so careful. Yeah, that's why I'm always cautious dealing with the media. I said I was going to share a story. I had like one thing after the other. Like I think I'm pretty comfortable in front of media, and I'm pretty, I think, clear when I'm talking to them. But they always seem to, I don't know, the way I communicate the idea or the issue, they always seem to take something else from it. And maybe it's just, their priorities. They're looking to hear something, and I'm looking to say something. So it's that whole filter stuff. And I was talking to one media outlet about South Sudan. He mentioned South Sudan. And they have a lot of ox. They use them for, it's basically their bank. They use it for trading for wives. So if you have 200 cows, you can trade that for one wife. And if you have enough cows, there's men out there that have 100 wives because they have so many cows, right? And they actually call it the walking bank for South Sudanese. So we came in with a bright idea of starting ox plowing because they were having trouble with agriculture and low rainfall and all that. So we said, if you could actually get some plowing going, the birds wouldn't be able to eat your seed as much, because what they used to do is take a little stick with sharpen the edge, and they just kind of poke at the ground, throw the seed in. But because it's so shallow, the birds would come down and take it all. So we said, if you could plow, you get a good foot of turf there. You can put your seeds in. It's harder for the birds to get it. And they just didn't get it. They weren't getting it. But anyway, we eventually convinced them. And we shipped in all these ox plows that you could hook up to their cows. And then we sent some trainers in who are experts in training oxen, if you can believe it. So they went in there to train them. So I was telling the media this, and I thought this was a great program. It's going to really raise agricultural crop yield. And the next day in the newspaper, it came out that we were shipping ox to South Sudan. And it's like New Zealand. They have more ox than people, more sheep than people in New Zealand. And so the big scandal was, why was World Vision and CARE sending in ox plows to South Sudan, or oxen to South Sudan, when they already have so many cows? So that was the first thing. So I just couldn't figure out how I got that wrong. And another one I did in Bangladesh was just before leaving. It was the day before my family was pulling out, coming home to Canada. And we had the big attack by Al-Qaeda. And that was the first Al-Qaeda coordinated attack. And there were like 32 attacks all across the country. And I just happened to be on my way to visit a friend. We were spending the weekend at his summer house outside the city. And we just picked up, chips and things, that the kids wanted, and left the shop. And just as we did, a guy came in and threw a grenade into the shop and blew it up. So of course, like he said, it's one of those opportunistic things. Oh, a Canadian and somebody who was almost blown up and an attack in a country, perfect. So I had Canadian media all over me wanting to talk to me. So, I just said, yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow. So, we're a bit shook up, and I didn't realize what they transcribed the next day was our family was leaving because of the attack. whereas actually we were leaving because I was leaving tomorrow anyway. So, of course, I get a call from the high commissioner, and he was a friend of mine, and he says, "Phil, what do you think you're doing? I've just got a call from Ottawa. They're like furious. Like, why would you say that?" say that? And I said, "I didn't say that. That's how they heard it." But anyway, it was, those are the kinds of things that when you're a manager out there, especially a Canadian, you will get Canadian media when something happens, will want to talk to a Canadian on the ground. And if you happen to be there, you'll be the person that they want to talk to. It doesn't matter if there's someone local and senior above you, they'll still want to talk to you. So sometimes you're just put on the spot and you need to be ready to, face the fire kind of thing. So I found Philip, extraordinarily useful. Like, if he was there, I would throw him in front of the camera because he's just better at it. Or, get training from him or somebody like him. You can get training from your organization. I got to the point where, I just got uncomfortable in front of the media because it can be so profound, the effect, that I told my agency, I just won't do it unless you guys train me. If you can train me how to stand in front of the media and learn all the stuff Philip was telling us today, then maybe I'll be more prepared to do it. But if I'm not prepared, it's a very risky thing. You can really put your foot in it. So, yeah. Okay, well, anyway, that I thought was an interesting speaker to have come in, but I also thought it's one of those that's really super important, and something that we always have to be aware of. Now, what I just want to do, because we're already at 9 o'clock, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you guys go early. I just want to review really quickly some of the stuff we talked about last week, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions because your assignment is based on it. And then we'll just close for the evening a little bit early. So in our last class, we had gone over those details of setting up the logic model, and you have that submission you're working on. And just as a reminder, on the slide, what you're looking at there, this is what a finished logic model might look like. So if you're using the template, the automated format that the federal government uses, that's really what it would look like. So the levels are the outputs leading to the immediate outcomes, to the intermediate outcomes, and then to the ultimate outcome. And they have to be clearly articulated. Now, the one I've given you is usually the draft format that we use as an organization before we transpose it into the automated format. So you're using the correct format before you would submit something like a proposal. Next winter, you might want to have a look at this online, because you'll probably be asked to, when you're doing a proposal development, you'll probably be asked to use the automated format. So in principle, you try to keep the number of intermediate outcomes that you have as limited as possible. So I tend to see 2 if the project is fairly small, like you have here on the example. Say a project under $1 million, that would be considered small. And it may have 3 intermediate outcomes if the budget is higher. It depends on the complexity of your project. And the main reason for this is the limited amount of funds that you have to work with for your project design. So you always have to keep in mind that the logic model tends to, build out like a pyramid shape, right? I showed you that on that previous slide. So the more you have at the top of the pyramid, the more, of course, you're going to have at the bottom. It spreads out. And at the bottom, those are the operational activities which have to be funded. So you can see, obviously, that your budget is going to grow really quickly the broader your base becomes, all right? Because those are the activities that you're funding. So you just have to be really careful. Everything is connected right to the top, and just make sure you're keeping it as manageable and within budget as possible. So in principle, you want to have about 2 to 3 immediate outcomes for each intermediate outcome that you have above it. So the reason I explained last week is that you can rarely affect a behavioral change outcome with only one immediate outcome. I mean, just usually you can't do it. So you usually will have several causes identified in your causal pathway. And so that means you'll have to come to the change from different angles, right? And that's why you'll have, several. So getting people to change their behavior, like say in washing their hands, may require things like awareness training, but it could also involve providing soap to them. That's a different activity. It could also involve access to clean water. You could be building that well. It's another activity and output. So you have to think critically in terms of what will it take to make the change happen that you're trying to affect in your project. Okay, so that's how you have to look at it. And then under the immediate outcomes, you want to have typically not more than 4 output statements. Now, I would say there's no golden rule in that regard. I've seen more, I've seen less. But you have to be careful again about spending on your project. So what are I would say the best way to look at it is what are the least number of outputs that you would require to impact that immediate outcome. And then same, for that level when you're affecting the intermediate outcome. The least amount of outputs. And that really should be your ultimate analysis. So you don't want activities and outputs that don't add value to the final result. Don't do it because you want to do it or you like doing it or there's something that you're really passionate about. Make sure that it has a direct correlation to the change effect that you want to do, because ultimately you have to pay for it. So the idea is that you have adequately built your logic model backwards. By that I mean you have started with the change you want to affect, and then you've built your logic backwards to address all the activities that you think it will take to make that change happen at the top. And then you should end up with a logic model that describes the results chain and the pathway to that change. And when you finish, you start writing another critical piece, and we'll be talking about this later on, something called the theory of change. Have you guys ever studied how to write a theory of change? Is that something you've done in another course?
I think it's been touched upon, but I don't think it's been explained like super in depth.
Okay, but is it familiar to most of you, would you say? Or maybe put your
For
hand
me
up
it
if
is,
it's
but I
familiar.
don't want to assume.
I just know about it from what we've discussed previously in this class.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Well, it's the next really big piece of this whole process. And when you start dealing with government, especially like federal government, global affairs, there you'll see online even a huge focus on the theory of change. And I would say besides the logic model, it's the most important part of your proposal development. So if you take the course next semester, you're definitely going to be, I'm sure, I hope, hearing about that. And I'll prepare you a little bit for that. So next week we'll be discussing theory of change as well. And it's really where you take the development challenge that you've identified, and then you describe how you're going to affect that positive change and get that development outcome. That's really, boiling it down, that's really what it means. So your logic model that you're working on, that becomes your roadmap, and your theory of change will articulate the logic model. It's kind of like a guideline or a handbook of the results chain through your project. So somebody will look at your logic model and they'll say, okay, I see, sort of what you're trying to do here, and they'll see how things are connected. But then when they read your narrative, your theory of change, it's not going to be a description of your logic model. It's going to be talking about your logic process. So, what was going on in your mind to connect this to this to this? Why did you do it that way and not some other way? So basically that's what a theory of change is, and it's a very compelling piece of a proposal. And then this is a slide that you'll probably want to keep handy for every project proposal that you develop if you're looking for funding for international development type projects. And you're definitely going to need it in your course next winter. So I would say whether the prof gives it to you or not, keep that in your back pocket. And I think it'll serve you really well when you're starting to look at how to design a project, the wording, the logic, the levels that it belongs in that framework. It's all going to be super important for you. And it describes the kind of changes that you can expect at each level, those changes, the type of wording that you'd use in the statements that we were creating, those result statements. So for your assignment, you'll want to consult this table as well very carefully for the assignment too. And I've also given feedback, just by the by, feedback to everyone from the in-class assignment. So hopefully you've received that by now. And so you should have a little bit better idea of the syntax in your result statement. But if not, definitely consult this and the key that I had given at the last class as well. So from your planned activities, your outputs really are describing the products and the services that's in the chart there. And those are delivered directly by your project. You have direct control over that. That's, trainings, constructions, community activities, could be meetings, conferences, you name it. And then when you get to that immediate level, that access to we were talking about, you're changing the overall capacity of your stakeholders. So it's really about capacity. And that's because you're giving them the access to something that they didn't have access to before. That's kind of the logic behind it. So maybe it's to training, it could be to skills development, it could be to awareness programs. And each of these is to increase or improve their abilities in some way. And so by saying that, you're already getting the key words: increase, so increase access to, or improve the ability of something or somebody. So those are very critical words at the immediate level. So the logic model would then dictate that, to this point at least, you have delivered some products and services, and the participants have then improved their capacity in some respect because of that, because of what you've just done. And now they're ready to apply the new capacities to something. So therefore, it implies they are ready to affect a change in some way. And sure enough, when we read the intermediate outcome level, you can see there, we see that their newfound capacities, hopefully you'd say, have changed their behavior, maybe their practice or their performance in some areas. Children are performing better. People are doing something differently, so they're breaking harmful practices, things like that. And this is not different from Tyndale. Let's say I was trying to think of a common example here, but Tyndale's providing you with a series of classes at the university level, and it's a result of the outputs that the university is creating, right? These classes that they're providing. And you gain some skills and knowledge in how to manage a project by taking this class, for example. So that's your immediate outcome where you have access to this class. And then after you graduate, you'll be applying these skills and knowledge, hopefully, to something that may affect a change in your life, maybe the way you manage, or the way that you conduct yourself overseas. Or it may change, something in your organization or amongst your stakeholders as you move along on your journey. So that's that change effect that takes place. And then, finally, there'll be a general change of state or condition or well-being. And, you could look at it again in terms of your own life. That could be making that six-figure job that you're hoping to make. You won't make that, by the way, in a charity sector. So just by the by. You might take on a career in a specific sector. You start a family, maybe, or you help your community to do something. So there'll be a change of state that is created, but naturally not all of your experience from this course, probably not even from all of your Tyndale courses, are going to achieve that all by themselves, right? You're going to see impacts and influences from various parts of your life as well, from your family, your parents, your friends, and so on. So there's lots of influencers as you move to that level. So you can say Tyndale has influenced your journey, but Tyndale can't attribute all of the success that you've had, all of your success, or your ultimate outcome, nor can I. I can only say that I've influenced it, but I certainly can't attribute what I'm doing now to your success down the road. So that's a more of a practical example of how your life perhaps would correspond. And by the way, I've given you also a little hint for your final exam in terms of how you can relate these project management issues to your own journey 5 years from now. So, okay, as you start preparing your activity base, so just going to that lower level now, and this is kind of a segue into budget development, you're going to want to build that structure from the logic model into kind of a table form or a matrix of activities. So I'll just show you an example here. And there's also, by the way, a global affairs automated version of this, like the other one. But this is we use this in Excel, and we just do it using MS Excel. So what I do is I usually will list the immediate outcomes individually, because that's the lowest level of operations that I control. And then I build my outputs and my activities under each of those outputs the way I explained it. And it just makes things a lot easier and more structured when we get to building the budget and assigning our indicators to each of the result statements. So this level of the project results are, I would say, fundamentally operational and part of your project. Like, it's things you can control, and it will directly affect your budget, as I was saying earlier. Okay, so everything that you see in this table here, you have to eventually put a price tag on it, and then that gets translated into the development of your budget. So as you can, see, and you can glean from the table, each output could have a different number of activities assigned to it. Every output is different. I can't tell you, this output used 2, bless you. This output used 3, this one's 4. Everyone is different, so it's really hard to predict. So you just use the logic I was mentioning earlier. But as you start listing all of the things you need to do, say, complete a well, as an example, you'll start to get a picture of what the costing structure is going to look like in order to do that. And that's where you have to be then really selective and careful in terms of what you keep in your work plan and what you throw out. So that's just winding up the discussion on the logic model from last week. I'll stop there just to see if you guys have any questions on that piece of it. Or maybe, even for your assignment, if there's any questions that you have at this moment that's still not addressed, maybe.
Yes. So
Yeah, Nick?
the activities and output. Sorry. Yeah, the outputs and activities. You want this in the assignment, correct?
Yeah, not the activities, just what's in there. So just follow the labels in the template.
Okay, only up to the immediate ones then, right?
Immediates and outputs. Yeah, outputs.
And outputs, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
not the activities.
And also, I was just wondering if you would be able to post the PowerPoint from last week on the Moodle as well.
I will. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'll put that up as well. Great.
Yeah, that's all I think.
Okay.
I just have a couple questions to clarify.
Yeah.
I have been working on the assignment, but I just wanted to clarify. So each cell per se in the logic model obviously must be filled out. But the second part of the assignment where we need to include a rough outline of our causal pathway or logic.
Yeah.
Is there a word count for that? And do you want that more in a paragraph form or in another table form? Like, how do you want that?
You remember the way we had it on the slide, the way Iqbal had also presented it? It was just like little Post-its.
Okay.
Normally when we do this in class, we just have everybody sort of write on their Post-its all the different, parts of their causal pathway, and then post it up on the wall, and then you'd reorganize it just so that it's, a visual display. You could do that if you have a program to do that, or if you just want to create a little, or even a handwritten thing and then photograph it. Quite honestly. So it'll be basically like that. Lots of little mini Post-its just to explain how this went to this, the way we did it.
Yeah, kind of like that map. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to see your logic. So, I can see it looking at a logic model. Like, I've done enough of them now, I can see. But because it's probably your first time doing it, it's going to be useful for me to know what your thinking process was to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, just one more question. Mm-hmm. I do know that with the assignment, you attach the RBM how-to guide.
Yeah.
And at the top, it says our results chain. Our results chain. Is that the same thing as the logic model? I'm just having trouble with the terminology. Like, are those the same things?
A logic model is, in the framework that I've provided to you. So it is, as the name implies, a logical way of placing all of your result statements so that they're, they're uniform and they're making sense. The results chain is more of a linear or vertical table. It's something a little bit different because you would take, say, one intermediate outcome, and then you'd have kind of a vertical table that kind of lists all of the things that are happening under it. It's almost a bit more like the causal pathway.
Okay.
So it just says this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, but it's more linear for that one section. Yeah. Okay. But it is different. They are two different things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Hope that's clear. Sorry. Okay. Anyone else have anything still pending? If not, next week, I just want to let you know, next week, because tonight, if we'd had time, I was going to go into the formulation of indicators, because that's another important piece with the theory of change. So next week, I'm going to be posting the lecture online. So I won't be doing a live broadcast next Thursday. So I'll pre-record the class, and then I'll post it right before class time so that you guys can, you can see it over the weekend if you want. And so just to say, it'll be there at the usual time. I'll get it up there by Thursday. And I'm going to be discussing how we create the indicators. So that'll be one piece of it. And that'll be for each result statement. And that's the next step, I think I've been saying, resulting from your logic model. So once you've got your logic model, you move on to something that's called the performance measurement framework. And I know that our guest speakers alluded to it when they were talking about it. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how you populate that. And then I'll then review how we pull together the RBM results chain that you were talking about, Rebecca, and the analysis, our causal pathway, our indicators, and then moving us now towards the writing of the theory of change. So that's going to be like the next important destination for us. I'm also going to include a description on how to prepare a budget using the results-based formula. And again, it's going to be based on Global Affairs Canada. So this will be, I think it's more, there's different ways of doing it, but I think teaching the Canadian version is probably more useful for you. You'll have more exposure to that. And so you'll get a description of that. Then the following week, I'll start just after that, I'll start with any questions you have on the pre-recording. So once you've seen it, I'll just start the next class and open it up if you have any concerns or questions about what you've heard, especially on creating indicators. And then I want to spend the rest of that class on the area that I really love, which is on project fundraising and grant acquisition. So that's really catching up on the syllabus now because we got a little bit behind because of the midterm and that. So that'll be my next, the next piece. And that's a huge piece for project management, is how to deal with fundraising. So that'll be the next thing. So any questions on that, guys, or any questions on your final exam? Because we'll have now like a two-week gap.
Sorry, just back to the assignment too. Did you say for the second part of it, that the rough outline of the causal pathway or logic for the result statements, is that in the PowerPoint? There's an example of it there, or?
It is, yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, it'll be in that one. It's also in the previous one with our guest speaker. He also had his causal pathway listed there. Yeah, if you go back, that one's already posted.
And the assignment is due Monday?
And yeah, by midnight. So yeah, and then I think Moodle locks it down, so you'll have to submit it by midnight or it shuts down. Yeah. Great. Okay, so anything else? Otherwise, it's well, we didn't get off that early, but I've really been aiming to let you guys go early one of these days, and so I thought, hey, today's a great great time to give you a little break. So it's 9:25 now, so I'll let you guys go 15 minutes early, and unless you have anything else. Perfect. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining. I hope it was useful this evening.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, we'll see you
Thank
again
you.
soon. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.